That woman understands everything, was Mr. Emerson's reply. But what are you doing here? Are you doing the church? Are you through with the church? No, cried Lucy, remembering her grievance. I came here with Miss Lavish, who was to explain everything, and just by the door, it is too bad she simply ran away, and after waiting quite a time, I had to come in by myself. Why shouldn't you? Said Mr. Emerson. Yes, why shouldn't you come by yourself? Said the son, addressing the young lady for the first time. But Miss Lavish has even taken away Baedeker. Baedeker, said Mr. Emerson. I'm glad it's that you minded. It's worth minding, the loss of a Baedeker. That's worth minding. Lucy was puzzled. She was again conscious of some new idea and was not sure whither it would lead her. If you've no Baedeker, said the son, you'd better join us. Was this where the idea would lead? She took refuge in her dignity. Thank you very much, but I could not think of that. I hope you do not suppose that I came to join on to you. I really came to help with the child and to thank you for so kindly giving us your rooms last night. I hope that you have not been put to any great inconvenience. My dear, said the old man gently, I think that you are repeating what you have heard older people say. You are pretending to be touchy, but you are not really. Stop being so tiresome. And tell me instead what part of the church you want to see. To take you to it will be a real pleasure. Now, this was abominably impertinent, and she ought to have been furious, but it is sometimes as difficult to lose one's temper as it is difficult at other times to keep it. Lucy could not get cross. Mr. Emerson was an old man, and surely a girl might humor him. On the other hand, his son was a young man, and she felt that a girl ought to be offended with him, or at all events to be offended before him. It was at him that she gazed before replying, I am not touchy, I hope. It is the Giottos that I want to see, if you will kindly tell me which they are. The son nodded with a look of somber satisfaction. He led the way to the Peruzzi Chapel. There was a hint of the teacher about him. She felt like a child in school who had answered a question rightly. The chapel was already filled with an earnest congregation, and out of them rose the voice of a lecturer directing them how to worship Giotto, not by tactful valuations, but by the standards of the Spirit. Remember, he was saying, the facts about this church of Santa Croce, how it was built by faith in the full fervor of medievalism, before any taint of the Renaissance had appeared. Observe how Giotto in these frescoes, now unhappily ruined by restoration, is untroubled by the snares of anatomy and perspective. Could anything be more majestic, more pathetic, beautiful, true? How little, we feel, avails knowledge and technical cleverness against a man who truly feels. No, exclaimed Mr. Emerson in much too loud a voice for church. Remember, nothing of the sort. Built by faith indeed. That simply means the workmen weren't paid properly. And as for the frescoes, I see no truth in them. Look at that fat man in blue. He must weigh as much as I do, and he is shooting into the sky like an air balloon. He was referring to the fresco of the Ascension of St. John. Inside, the lecturer's voice faltered, as well it might. The audience shifted uneasily, and so did Lucy. She was sure that she ought not to be with these men, but they had cast a spell over her. They were so serious and so strange that she could not remember how to behave. Now, did this happen or didn't it? Yes or no? George replied. It happened like this. If it happened at all, I would rather go up to heaven by myself than be pushed by cherubs. And if I got there, I should like my friends to lean out of it, just as they do here. You will never go up, said his father. You and I, dear boy, will lie at peace in the earth that bore us, and our names will disappear as surely as our work survives. Some of the people can only see the empty grave, not the saint, whoever he is, going up. It did happen like that, if it happened at all. Pardon me, said a frigid voice. The chapel is somewhat small for 2 parties. We will incommode you no longer. The lecturer was a clergyman, and his audience must be also his flock, for they held prayer books as well as guidebooks in their hands. They filed out of the chapel in silence. Amongst them were the 2 little old ladies of the Pension Bertolini, Miss Teresa and Miss Catherine Allen. Stop, cried Mr. Emerson. There's plenty of room for us all. Stop. The procession disappeared without a word. Soon the lecturer could be heard in the next chapel, describing the life of St. Francis. George, I do believe that clergyman is the Brixton curate. George went into the next chapel and returned, saying, Perhaps he is. I don't remember. Then I had better speak to him and remind him who I am. It's that Mr. Eager. Why did he go? Did we talk too loud? How vexatious. I shall go and say we are sorry. Hadn't I better? Then perhaps he will come back. He will not come back, said George. But Mr. Emerson, contrite and unhappy, hurried away to apologize to the Reverend Cuthbert Eager. Lucy, apparently absorbed in a lunette, could hear the lecture again interrupted, the anxious, aggressive voice of the old man, the curt, injured replies of his opponent. The son, who took every little contretemps as if it were a tragedy, was listening also. My father has that effect on nearly everyone, he informed her. He will try to be kind. I hope we all try, said she, smiling nervously, because we think it improves our characters, but he is kind to people because he loves them, and they find him out and are offended or frightened. How silly of them, said Lucy, though in her heart she sympathized. I think that a kind action done tactfully. Tact! He threw up his head in disdain. Apparently she had given the wrong answer. She watched the singular creature pace up and down the chapel. For a young man, his face was rugged and, until the shadows fell upon it, hard. Enshadowed, it sprang into tenderness. She saw him once again at Rome, on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, carrying a burden of acorns. Healthy and muscular, he yet gave her the feeling of grayness, of tragedy that might only find solution in the night. The feeling soon passed. It was unlike her to have entertained anything so subtle. Born of silence and of unknown emotion, it passed when Mr. Emerson returned, and she could re-enter the world of rapid talk, which was alone familiar to her. Were you snubbed? Asked his son tranquilly. But we have spoilt the pleasure of I don't know how many people. They won't come back. Full of innate sympathy, quickness to perceive good in others, vision of the brotherhood of man. Scraps of the lecture on St. Francis came floating round the partition wall. Don't let us spoil yours, he continued to Lucy. Have you looked at those saints? Yes, said Lucy. They are lovely. Do you know which is the tombstone that is praised in Ruskin? He did not know, and suggested that they should try to guess it. George, rather to her relief, refused to move, and she and the old man wandered not unpleasantly about Santa Croce, which, though it is like a barn, has harvested many beautiful things inside its walls. There were also beggars to avoid and guides to dodge round the pillars, and an old lady with her dog, and here and there a priest modestly edging to his mass through the groups of tourists. But Mr. Emerson was only half interested. He watched the lecturer, whose success he believed he had impaired, and then he anxiously watched his son. Why will he look at that fresco? He said uneasily. I saw nothing in it. I like Giotto, she replied. It is so wonderful what they say about his tactile values, though I like things like the Della Robbia babies better. So you ought. A baby is worth a dozen saints, and my baby's worth the whole of paradise. And as far as I can see, he lives in hell. Lucy again felt this did not do. In hell, he repeated. He's unhappy. Oh dear, said Lucy. How can he be unhappy when he is strong and alive? What more is one to give him? And think how he has been brought up, free from all the superstition and ignorance that lead men to hate one another in the name of God. With such an education as that, I thought he was bound to grow up happy. She was no theologian, but she felt that here was a very foolish old man, as well as a very irreligious one. She also felt that her mother might not like her talking to that kind of person, and that Charlotte would object most strongly. What are we to do with him, he asked. He comes out for his holiday to Italy and behaves like that, like the little child who ought to have been playing, and who hurt himself upon the tombstone, eh? What did you say? Lucy had made no suggestion. Suddenly he said, now don't be stupid over this. I don't require you to fall in love with my boy, but I do think you might try and understand him. You are nearer his age, and if you let yourself go, I am sure you are sensible. You might help me. He has known so few women, and you have the time. You stop here several weeks, I suppose? But let yourself go. You are inclined to get muddled, if I may judge from last night. Let yourself go. Pull out from the depths those thoughts that you do not understand and spread them out in the sunlight and know the meaning of them. By understanding George, you may learn to understand yourself. It will be good for both of you. To this extraordinary speech, Lucy found no answer. I only know what it is that's wrong with him, not why it is. And what is it? Asked Lucy fearfully, expecting some harrowing tale. The old trouble. Things won't fit. What things? The things of the universe. It is quite true. They don't. Oh, Mr. Emerson, whatever do you mean? In his ordinary voice, so that she scarcely realized he was quoting poetry, he said, from far from even morning and yon 12-winded sky, the stuff of life to knit me blew hither. Here am I. George and I both know this, but why does it distress him? We know that we come from the winds and that we shall return to them, that all life is perhaps a knot, a tangle, a blemish in the eternal smoothness. But why should this make us unhappy? Let us rather love one another and work and rejoice. I don't believe in this world's sorrow. Miss Honeychurch assented. Then make my boy think like us. Make him realize that by the side of the everlasting why, there is a yes, a transitory yes, if you like, but a yes. Suddenly she laughed. Surely one ought to laugh, a young man melancholy because the universe wouldn't fit, because life was a tangle or a wind or a yes or something. I'm very sorry, she cried. You'll think me unfeeling, but then she became matronly. Oh, but your son wants employment. Has he no particular hobby? Why, I myself have worries, but I can generally forget them at the piano. And collecting stamps did no end of good for my brother. Perhaps Italy bores him. You ought to try the Alps or the lakes. The old man's face saddened, and he touched her gently with his hand. This did not alarm her. She thought that her advice had impressed him and that he was thanking her for it. Indeed, he no longer alarmed her at all. She regarded him as a kind thing, but quite silly. Her feelings were as inflated spiritually as they had been an hour ago aesthetically, before she lost Baedeker. The dear George, now striding towards them over the tombstone, seemed both pitiable and absurd. He approached, his face in the shadow. He said, Miss Bartlett? Oh, good gracious me, said Lucy, suddenly collapsing again, seeing the whole of life in a new perspective. Where? In the nave. I see. Those gossiping little Miss Allens must have... She checked herself. Poor girl, exploded Mr. Emerson. Poor girl. She could not let this pass, for it was just what she was feeling herself. Poor girl. I fail to understand the point of that remark. I think myself a very fortunate girl, I assure you. I'm thoroughly happy and having a splendid time. Pray don't waste time mourning over me. There's enough sorrow in the world, isn't there, without trying to invent it? Goodbye. Thank you both so much for your kindness. Ah, yes. There does come, my cousin. A delightful morning. Santa Croce is a wonderful church. She joined her cousin.